Go-Go was declared Washington, D.C.'s official music in 2020. Originating in the 1970s, it mixes elements of funk, disco, rhythm and blues, soul, and hip-hop. It is made predominantly by and for the district's Black population. This video focuses on the places where Go-Go was performed, particularly during its heyday in the 1980s and 1990s. The purpose is to show the varied geography of DC's indigenous Black musical style. Go-Go is a style of music frequently performed at skating rinks. It is both urban and suburban/rural music. It is Afro-diasporic music played at nightclubs whose names reference locations in Africa. It is also family-friendly music heard at parks, community centers, and pools in the metropolitan area. In short, Go-Go is music that makes an appearance in a multitude of DC spaces. However, such spaces are at risk. For one, the federal government is pressuring DC to obscure its Black history. Nothing speaks to this more than Mayor Muriel Bowser's decision to remove the Black Lives Matter painting on the street adjacent to the White House. If she did not, Representative Andrew Clyde of Georgia has introduced legislation in March 2025 that states DC would lose federal funding. Simultaneously, Go-Go is susceptible to gentrification. In 1970, the city was more than 71% Black. However, as of 2020, the Black population dropped to 49%. Meanwhile, DC has one of the highest rates of economic displacement in the country, with the median income of white households about 3 times that of Black ones. As scholar Ali Martin summarizes, quote, "Go-Go venues in the city have closed while the Black population in the city decreases and median income increases," end quote. The purpose of this video is not to signal the death or even impeding death of DC's official Black music. It certainly mourns the venues that have closed, yet it also celebrates the venues that are still in operation, particularly in an era when governmental and non-governmental actors alike are trying to erase such stories and, in many cases, such buildings. How can we tell where Go-Go was performed, particularly during its heyday in the 1980s and 1990s? The Globe Printing Company offers answers since many Go-Go shows were frequently promoted on their posters. Founded in 1929 in Baltimore, Maryland, Globe posters were recognizable for their fluorescent colors and bold wood font type. Look at this one promoting a show at Cherry's, a popular venue located in Southwest DC. You can see that it took place on Saturday, June 27. It featured Go-Go bands Experience Unlimited, Little Benny and the Masters, and Physical Wonder. It even has instructions for the attendees: no loitering and littering, no refunds, no re-entrance of the venue, and no outside recording equipment. Scholar Natalie Hopkinson has studied these posters, most of which were printed in the 1980s and 1990s. Hopkinson is primarily invested in which bands and venues were most promoted. How often was anti-drug messaging prominent on them? What were some of the most popular dates and times? In other words, what was the schedule of Go-Go? Hopkinson argues that such posters countered false public narratives of DC's native Black population as dangerous and deviant. They asserted Black resistance and resilience. This video follows in Hopkinson's footsteps and looks at about 1,000 Globe posters held at Johns Hopkins Archives and focuses on the posters' geographic and venue information that they provide. Go-Go is Afro-diasporic music. It features elements of call and response prominent in West Africa. Congas, timbales, cowbells, and other percussion typical of Afro-Latin music appear often. Go-Go musicians typically play their rhythms with swing, a rhythmic alteration prominent in other diasporic musics. Instead of playing subdivisions, quote, straight, Go-Go musicians give them a little lilt. Such transformations are heard in the swung eights of jazz music, in the rhythmic chop of Jamaican reggae, and in the momentous drive of the Afro-Brazilian samba. Chuck Brown even composed a song that celebrated this rhythmic nuance. He called this song the, quote, Go-Go swing. It would only make sense that Go-Go would be heard in venues that were similarly diasporic in their outlook. By the 1960s, many in the music industry were invested in the worldwide decolonization movement. Trumpeter Lee Morgan celebrated Kenya's independence in 1963 with an original composition called Mr. Kenyatta. Jackie McLean made a similar tribute in Appointment in Ghana. Meanwhile, venue owners were opening performance spaces and supper clubs that invoked African culture. During the early 1970s, jazz musicians Lonnie Smith and Grant Green released albums live at Detroit's Club Mozambique. In 1979, Club Zanzibar, a famous venue in Newark that specialized in house music, opened. DC residents were not blind to such broader economic, political, social, and musical trends. Clubs paid homage to the ibex, a wild goat found prominently in East Africa. Club owners referenced Mount Kilimanjaro, the dormant volcano and highest mountain in Africa. Some invoked words like calabash, a West African gourd used for everything from drinking palm wine to making instruments, and others referred to Southeast African safaris. Each venue engaged in the African diaspora in its own way. The Casbah and Ibex nightclubs were primarily jazz venues. The Safari Club was an Ethiopian restaurant by day, but it was the Kilimanjaro that was most overt in its connections. It was owned by Kenyan emigre Victor Kabunja, who opened it in 1982. The walls were adorned with murals of Patrice Lumumba and Martin Luther King Jr. His 500-person venue catered to parties hosted by African embassies and, according to Kabunja, helped, quote, introduce America to Africans and Africans to each other, end quote. One patron praised the venue, claiming that, quote, when I first moved to Washington from France in the early 1980s, the Kilimanjaro was one of the few places I found in Washington that had the sort of international flair I missed after leaving Paris, end quote. There, individuals could listen to live reggae and African music as well as go-go performances by Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers and Rare Essence. Where did go-go musicians tend to learn these Afro-diasporic rhythms, call and response, funk vamps, and static harmonies prominent within go-go? Several places stand out: at home, attending live performances, from their parents, and listening to records. School is often credited as well. Our go-go artists, they learned in public school. Government support of the arts was everything, Michelle Blackwell, leader of the What Band, declares. The origin story of Experience Unlimited provides one example. The band was formed in 1971 by a group of students from Ballou Senior High School in Southeast DC. Sugar Bear, Experience Unlimited's bassist, learned to play in junior high. Quote, as a kid, I wanted to play bass guitar so bad, I made me one in Hart Junior High School woodshop, he recalls. Robert Reed, also known as Psych Dyke, was the keyboardist for Trouble Funk. Before that, he played trombone in the marching band at H.T. Woodson High. DC area public schools were so formative on go-go musicians that they frequently include their alma maters in their artist bios. When asked where he was from, Frank Scooby Sirius, lead singer of Listen, answered simply, I am from Southeast Washington, D.C., a proud product of the D.C. public school system, an Eastern High graduate. It therefore would make sense for such schools to feature prominently on Globe posters. Shows at schools were not just popular, they were also well received. During the 1980s and 1990s, audiences often brought portable recording equipment to go-go shows, creating cassettes called PA tapes. These tapes were then circulated and listened to by fans around the district. Cato Hammond, go-go musician and historian, reminisces that one of his favorite PA tapes is a live recording of Trouble Funk. It took place at Duval High School in 1981. Parks, community centers, public pools, and other recreational facilities provided additional locations to hear go-go. These venues were family-friendly. Shows there typically took place during the day as opposed to late at night. There was no age limit for attendees. Sometimes admission was even free. Milton Smith, drummer for Chuck Brown, recalls that he was first exposed to go-go while attending shows at these types of venues. One of the more prominent leisure spaces for go-go were roller skating rinks. Skating became popular in the late 19th century as a valuable form of exercise and Victorian courtship. Skating rinks operated under this premise for much of the 20th century as well. They were places where white couples glided along the floor in a manner that resembled ballroom dancing. These were segregated spaces though, and much like other leisure places such as pools, parks, beaches, and amusement parks, skating rinks were regularly the object of desegregation campaigns. After the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, skating rinks still segregated its clientele. Special, quote, urban and soul nights were reserved specifically for black skaters. It was on these nights that such skaters helped transform the activity beyond its Victorian roots. The music they skated to was contemporary and modern soul, funk, and rhythm and blues. By the 1980s, skating rinks in the DC area added go-go to the rotation. DJs like Dr. Disco and Jazz Funk, and bands like Hot Cold Sweat and Little Benny and the Masters regularly broadcast their sound to skaters circling the rink. The parks, schools, and recreational centers are still in operation. However, many of the other venues like the Safari Club, Ibex, Caspa, and Kilimanjaro, promoted on globe posters, are closed. A recent report conducted by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition helps explain why. Nearly half of the city's neighborhoods are threatened by gentrification. Many Black DC residents worry about the sonic effects of such demographic change. They frequently feel that go-go is at risk of what they call, quote, cultural extinction. Their concern is justified. Victor Kibunja recognized the impact of such demographic change as early as 1995. His Kilimanjaro club was located in an Adams Morgan neighborhood that was full of old and underutilized buildings. Over the decades, though, he saw rents balloon as individuals took advantage of the location. Restaurants and boutiques opened along 18th Street and Columbia Road. Houses along T and U were remodeled. And with some changes brought new neighbors who had different aspirations to Kibunja. Noise complaints directed at the club began to occur. Residents took issue with the litter caused by the club's flyers. The Kilimanjaro's clientele perturbed new residents as well. Customers would pee on porch steps while drunk. Crime, including stabbings and a shooting, occurred on the premises. Kibunja, although cognizant of the issues plaguing his venue, nevertheless felt the residents' complaints were overstated. Quote, "The Kilimanjaro sparked the economic revival of this whole part of Adams Morgan," he argued. "If it had not been for what we started here, those people would have never moved in. But now they're here. They want to kill the goose that laid the egg." End quote. A similar story rehashed itself decades later on Florida Avenue and 7th Street Northwest. Donald Campbell, owner of a Metro PCS located at the intersection, had been playing go-go from his storefront for decades. However, recent arrival to the neighborhood's new nearby luxury mixed-use developments began complaining to the corporate office. In 2019, Verizon Wireless momentarily forced Campbell's Metro PCS to stop broadcasting go-go from its outdoor speakers. Only after a concerted effort called Don't Mute DC was the decision reversed. While several venues have been lost, scholars Brandy Thompson-Summers and Ali Martin note how Black communities continue to listen and perform this music as a means to resist gentrification and urban displacement. Natalie Hopkinson has recently opened a museum devoted to go-go. Ali Martin discusses the subject in detail in their new monograph, Intersectional Listening, Gentrification and Black Sonic Life in Washington, D.C. Organizations like Long Live Go-Go continue to promote the music. Good Decisions and Concert Studios provide rehearsal space for go-go bands, while go-go interviews and live performances are broadcast from Heartbeat Radio. As Martin writes in Intersectional Listening, quote, "Go-go is killed every day, yet go-go lives. In the clubs that open as quickly as old ones are shut down, in community programs where bands play in neighborhood parks and local correctional facilities, and on the internet where online radio shows interact with their audiences in real time, no matter where they are," end quote. Globe may have ceased production and go-go's historic venues may have closed, but go-go remains.